Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of We Need to Talk. Today, joining me on the show is my very good friend. He is a comedian, he is a writer, and a producer, Mr. Dewayne Perkins. Dewayne, thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I was just thinking about the first time I met you. And I remember I came into audition for the web series that you and Michael were doing, and you were so serious. And then I got to know you, and I was like, he doesn't have a serious bone in his body.
That's the trick. I just trick people into thinking that I'm serious. Uh, 'Cause, I feel like as a comic, I want people to take because like innately I'm not very serious,
Right.
and so when people first meet me, I'm like I have to convince them that I am serious. So when I reveal who I really am, they don't lose all faith in me.
You get the job and then show who you are. There's so many memes
Yep.
like that. It's hilarious. I love it. But your career has grown so much in the last few years, and I love having almost known you for a decade at this point. I can't believe it's been that long, but I've loved seeing how much you've grown. But I want to go back to kind of what your path trajectory has been and like how you got into writing and doing stand-up comedy, and if you always knew that this was the path that you wanted to take.
Um, it's not the path that I knew that I wanted to take. So it started in high school where I was a football player, and then I quit that because I was like, "This is aggressive. Please stop hitting me. I don't like this." And then I joined my high school's dance team, and at the time I was like, "Oh, I'm not ready to be this out. People gonna think I'm gay," so I quit that too. And then I found improv and sketch, and I was like, "Oh, this is cute because I can just like be whoever I want to be." And then the two women who were in charge of the improv and sketch group were also the directors of the musical theater program. So they were like, "Oh, come do theater and stuff." And I was like, "Sure, whatever. I'm not doing anything else." And then they kind of like blindsided me to go to college, which is not like blindsided, but like the Sandra one, like, "Oh, like we're white, little black boy, you can do it." So they were like, "All right, go to this school for acting," and I was like, "Okay." And then I got cut from DePaul University, which made sense because I remember going to college. Like I just went to the north side from the south side in Chicago, and I remember being in class, and on day one, the teacher was like, "Take off your shoes," and I was like, "For what?" And I just realized that like I did not know how to exist in white
Yeah.
spaces yet. So in order to like be good at acting, you have to have like a certain level of vulnerability that I just did not have because I was like, I don't trust y'all. I don't know y'all. This is crazy. So then I got cut, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And then I started dancing for like a little bit, like so I just needed something to do creatively. And then one of my best friends and writing partners, Asia Bullock, she was at Second City taking classes, and we were on the same dance company. And she was like, "Hey, you should come take classes with me because everybody's white and I don't want to be by myself." And I was like, "Okay." um, so then that's kind of how I found Second City. And then based on kind of the trajectory of that, like when I was in acting school, all the roles that they would try to give me were like, I don't know, like old angry fathers, and I was like, literally, this is not
Who I am.
fun.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this. um, and so then comedy kind of allowed me, and like writing allowed me to play roles that people would never give me.
Mhm.
And based on the intersection of like who I am, representation was just not a thing for like queer black men, so people just didn't know what to do with me. And so then I figured out like, oh, I have to have power and control, so then I can dictate what happens to me versus me just letting people do
Right.
what they want to me and put me in boxes I didn't want to be in. So that's so improv and sketch introduced me to that. So then I just became obsessed with power, I guess. It's been
Not
like how
power.
can I how can I dictate how I'm treated cuz this industry's trash.
Right,
And
right.
so I just because of my queerness and blackness, very early I was like, this is not gonna work for me as is.
Yeah.
So I have notes, and we just gonna have to change all of it. And then stand up, I got into stand up because I was doing a show in DC that was half improv and half sketch and half stand up. And I remember I wrote like a lot of the show, and some executives from Comedy Central came because some of the stand ups submitted stand up half hour specials, and we were talking to them as a cast, and I just remember the perception that they had of the performers, and they saw me as an actor and not like a creator or writer,
Hmm.
just because what they saw on stage was me acting in scenes. They didn't necessarily think like, oh, somebody had to write these scenes, which was me.
Right.
But with stand up, it was instantly like, oh, we know who you are, we know you can write, we know how you can perform. And I was like, oh, this is the way I want to be perceived. And then the stand ups were like, why don't you just do stand up? And in Chicago, there was this weird, like, improv versus stand up. And so I just was like, I don't have time for this. So then I tried stand up for the first time, and I remember being terrified. And then when I did it, I was like, oh, this is what this is? Like, I have all the skills to do this. It was just a matter of what I thought it was going to be. And then I realized stand up was exactly what I was looking for, which was me having the most control over what I say and do. And I was like, oh, I should have been doing this from the beginning because I've been seeking control this whole time.
Yeah.
And once I started doing stand up, that kind of jump started everything because I then had the control to tell and show people exactly what I wanted to do. So then I feel like I had a greater hand in figuring out where I wanted my career to go because it was all based off things that I said and wrote.
Right. Right.
So I feel like that's kind of where the track went was like acting was like improv, acting, sketching, improv, then stand up, and me realizing like, okay, I know what this is. And then writing became my main thing, just because I could do it at home. Um,
He's like,
and
let
then
me just be
quarantine,
honest about that.
right? I'm like, it's, and that's what's been nice. Like in quarantine, a lot of my friends who stand up was their whole thing. They were like, now that it's gone, I don't know what to do. And I was like, girl. And then they would ask me, like, what are you doing? And I was like, I just shifted to the thing that I can do in the circumstances that we're in.
Yeah.
And it just so happens that it was writing, and it's been very fruitful.
Yeah.
So I think everybody should be writing just because it's
You can do it in bed.
it's helpful, right? And they be paying you good money.
Yes. Well, you know what I love about your story is that you you brought these opportunities into your world by just being authentic to who you are. But I don't think, and I'm curious if you think this, it just seems like it's not as easy for Black people in general to do that.
I agree. I think that the circumstance, like a lot of things that I've experienced in my life, I think prepared me for the spaces that I are in, and because of what I experienced, like growing up and some of the struggles that I had to kind of figure out very young. When I got into these spaces where people would try to convince me to have fear, I just wouldn't have any. And I feel like a lot of industry, especially entertainment, is ran by fear.
Right.
And I'm just like, I don't know.
That's a good
No,
point, because
I
there's
don't
a
want
fear
that.
like I'm not going to get this job, or I'm going to lose this job if I'm really true to myself and true to what I want to do and what I want to say. But you just didn't care, so it's a personality thing for you.
Yes, because like I think like growing up on the South Side of Chicago and dealing with my sexuality as like a 16, 15-year-old, I was convinced in my head that if I came out, I was going to lose everybody in my life.
Yeah.
And so I like prepared myself to be alone and independent. And I was like, I have to love myself more than anybody else, because what if I'm by myself? So that kind of mindset, I think, just followed me to right now. Like when I was younger, when I first started, my mother would say like, oh, maybe you shouldn't be like so open. Like there's so many like terrible people. Are you afraid that like this is going to hurt your chances by being so you? And I was like, oh, at this point in my life, like I don't want to work with people if I have to change who I
Yeah.
am, because that's going to defeat the purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I just feel like if my personality does not fit within a space, I'm not meant to be there. And I just like have held very true to that, because like I've said yes to things that I felt weird about, and every single time it ends up being trash, because I'm like, yeah, why would it not be?
You're like, I knew from the beginning, and I should have just gone with my first mind.
I'm like, I felt the vibes.
Yeah.
I should have just listened.
And that's crazy, because
And-
I think
and
a lot
it's-
of people in this industry think that like you have to say yes to every opportunity that comes your way, or you're going to miss out on something. But I don't think that that's true. And I think it's like what you said, like if I'm meant to be in a space, I will be in that space.
Yes, and I think I have a very objective way of thinking where I'll like look at something and like really weigh the pros and cons and be like, okay, is the potential like if is the potential trauma or like trashness worth the pros of what I'm going to get from this? And if it does not add up, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
So like I can understand like walking into a situation knowing it's going to be trash, but knowing like I'm gonna get a bunch of money. So then mentally at least I could like prepare myself to be like, oh yeah, I know this is gonna be trash, but like the goal is not to have a good time.
Right.
The goal is money.
Right.
So if I'm just figuring out like what am I getting from this? And it just has to balance out because you're not going to treat me poorly and pay me
Right.
poorly. No, no.
You're like, I'll take the money if it's gonna be trash, as long as the money is.
I'm like,
speaking right.
something's got to give.
Oh my gosh, I love that mindset. So I know you spent a lot of time at Second City getting training there, and I also know that you had this long viral thread a while back about the things that happened at Second City. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I think I did like one workshop at Second City when I was in Chicago, which is where we met. And, clearly you having been there for a long period of time and being involved, you were going to be exposed to more things than I was. But I want to talk a little bit about your experience there just as a Black actor and Black comedian.
It's weird because I do think like improv as an art form is such a special art form. And I think it helped me a lot as a person. And I still to this day, like I love improv. I just did not like the system in which that was dictating who got chosen to do it. And Second City in particular, I just think that like their culture was just created with people like me not in mind, and a lot of entertainment is based on like precedent and tradition. And I was like, look, you can't expect for me to respect these if I'm not even included in them. So like, I'm sorry, this don't work.
Right.
And during the time that I was there was like, it was mainly ran by white people. And there was a separation where there was like, we want to be better, but also stop telling us that we're bad. And so they would create this like cyclical problem where they would try to convince their people of color to help them be better. But when the opportunity came for us to tell them what was wrong, they would be like, you're difficult to work with. So then it vilified all of the people of color for doing the things that they encouraged us to do. And that's just like gaslighting. And that's
Absolutely.
not like a real, I'm like, that's not how this works.
Right.
And I think because there were so few people of color throughout their history, I think they relied on like the token. They relied on a person having to be isolated to use that fear to force them to be in these spaces and not speak up because they knew that the opportunities were so scarce.
Yeah.
But I feel like my generation of people, we were all friends. It's like we know each other. We talk. Like you can't tell me something and then tell my friend something different and think we're not going to talk about it.
Right.
So there was a lot of just like blatant lies that we were like, that's not true. Like you literally are telling us different things. We can see this system and why it doesn't work. And also we did not come to Second City to get good. We came to Second City to like focus skills, but we knew that like, oh, we don't owe our success to you.
Right.
Like you don't have the token that they were trying to use, they just didn't have because we were like, you didn't give us anything. So like, we don't have to be here. So like, don't be mean to us.
Right.
And then when they were, we all quit. And then they were like, oh, damn. and we were like, yeah. Like, what did you think was going to happen? You can't just be mean to all your Black people and think we're just going to stay here.
Right.
Like, that's crazy.
Right. So do you think that you took anything positive from that experience?
Yeah, like some of my favorite people, like I met some, like some of my best friends. That's where I met Shantira Jackson, and we are like the best of friends. We work a lot together. My friend Lisa Beasley, that's where I met 3P. Like a lot of the things that my career have stemmed from has come from that building. Which I can recognize and also be like, yeah, y'all was still trash. Like two things can exist at one time.
Right.
I benefited from it, but also it was traumatic and I had to go through a lot of therapy. So
You're like Second City, you need to pay my therapy bill.
Yeah, so like similar to what I was saying earlier, like some of the pros were worth it. Like would I do it again? Yes,
Mm,
because the people that I have in my life are irreplaceable.
right.
But the way that I handled it, I would also handle it the same way. Like I'm not, if I enter a space, I'm just not going to allow people to mistreat me so blatantly. But I feel good about it. And with the whole Twitter thing popped off, it wasn't like I was like, oh, I have to bring Second City down. It was me just truthfully being like, well, this was my
Exactly.
experience there.
Exactly.
And then a bunch of other people were like, well, since you said it, yeah, this was trash. So then it started this like snowball, and I was like, that's not my problem. If I was the only person treated this way, this would have been a singular thread of my thoughts. But because it was a systemic problem, there was a bunch of people who felt encouraged by what I said to speak up, and I was like, clearly this is not a me
Right.
thing. This is
Right.
a y'all thing. So like, I don't know what y'all want from me.
But I think that that is, when somebody leads, more people feel comfortable coming out speaking about their experiences. So I am glad that you did that, because it did encourage a lot of other people to say like, oh yeah, Second City is totally racist.
It did, which felt good because I see firsthand how often, depending on like resources and privilege, people don't feel encouraged to speak up because there is a lot of real fear. Because
Hmm.
like as you said, this industry is not made for us, and there's a lot of walking on eggshells that you have to do. But based on the research and the experience that I already had, I was like, girl, Second City ain't got no power over me. I don't who the fuck they gonna like what they gonna do?
Right.
What they gonna say?
Right.
I do not
Right.
care. I just do not care. And so I felt very okay with being like, girl, fuck y'all. And people were like, okay. And so like I feel good 'cause I was like, I don't know how many people feel okay saying this, but like I feel very fine with it
Right.
because
You're
again,
like,
what
I
y'all
sleep
gonna
at
do?
night.
I'm like,
Right.
y'all gonna what? Beat like they not gonna beat my ass? Like there's just
Right.
the stakes just were so low,
Hmm.
and I'm just like I don't feel bad about this. Y'all should feel bad about the way y'all treat
For
people,
sure. Do you
and
think there
that's.
will be a culture change because of you calling them out? Or do you think that they're just set in their ways and how they've operated for such a long time?
I mean, I think that like around that time, like right after that, Andrew quit, and then like the group of black alums put together a letter to like address the problems,
Hmm.
and like there was some like structural change within, but I don't know, and honestly I don't
Yeah.
care. Like
You're
part of
like,
me is like,
out of
I
sight, out
mean,
of mind.
I hope it's better for people that come after me
Right.
because that's the whole point. To be like, this doesn't have to be this way. Like what I got from Second City was helpful, but it would have been better if it was not accompanied with so much trauma.
Hmm.
And that's the thing. I'm like, if that was just what it was, I would not have a bad thing to say.
Right.
So I'm hoping that there's a change of culture, but like based on the patterns of the world, I don't have that much faith. Also, they just sold to like a private equity firm, and
Mm.
so we're gonna just see how long they last.
Right, right. Oh wow, I didn't know that. Interesting. So, okay, so now that you're in writers' rooms, we always talk about representation and the lack of it in terms of, our community. Do you feel like in that sense as a writer, being a black writer, excuse me, that is changing, that there is a shift in terms of representation behind the camera?
No, like
You
I would say that was.
nobody can see you because this is a podcast, but the way you just went like, no, like you, I wish you all could have seen his face because he was like, yeah, because I mean we are seeing it
Like
more
I
in
like.
front of the camera, but I'm curious, since you're in the writers' room, what your view is with that.
I mean, I like thought about it, and I was like, "What is my answer?" And I was just like, "I can't." Like, yes, there are some like there's progress, but one of the biggest things I remember, like my first writing job when I moved here, I was like, okay, this is gonna be great. And then I like remember my first episode of TV. I like was on set, and there was like hundreds of people, and there was like just two black people, and it was me and then the actor that I wrote the part for, and I was like, "Girl, this is what?" And like,
Wow.
I do think that like it was shocking to get a peek behind the curtain and see like, oh, like y'all don't care as much as like we are pretending to care. Like there is people do enough to stop people from dragging them. Like they're like, well, what's the bare minimum that we could do? And it's truly like the barest of minimums. There of most of the jobs that I've had, I've been still the only black person. Like there's not that much. Like the Amber Ruffin show was the first show that I've ever worked on where I had a black boss, where I got to write from a perspective where I didn't have to change it for another demographic. And I never felt the feeling of being like, oh, I can just write from a lived experience. This is what most of my white counterparts have had their entire lives. And just seeing that like shift, I was like, girl, this is all bad. Like that's all me and my therapist talk about, is me being like, hey, so me as a person just morally does not fit within this industry. So how can I continue? And she's like, I don't know, figure it out. But that's just like, so like I want to yes, I recognize progress, but it's so slow.
Yeah.
Like, it is very slow.
Yeah. I mean, it feels that way, but
yeah.
I'm not in that, sense in the industry, in the medium that you're in. So I didn't know, like, from your vantage point, like what you were seeing. But I mean, it makes sense to me. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and like, and most of the group chats that I have with like my peers is mainly like black writers being like all experiencing the same thing, like in these rooms that are just like so toxic, so terrible, and you're like, how has this continued to be this way for so long? And then you realize, oh, because like when you enter these spaces, either you're going to fight constantly, which is tiring, or you're going to say nothing and be bombarded with terribleness, which is also tiring. So either way, you're just like constantly getting drained, and you're constantly questioning, like, is this worth it? Like, what am I getting from this? And at some point, like, you either are going to like fight till you don't have a voice, or you're going to be so burned out that you just stop fighting.
Right.
And when I first started, I would see people like, why aren't you saying anything? Like, why is everybody so complicit? And then as time went on, I was like, oh, I get it. Like, oh, y'all are like, y'all know that like y'all can talk, but like ain't shit changing. And y'all can see it because like all of y'all are white and y'all are still unhappy. So what the fuck y'all think I feel? I'm like, this is crazy.
So here, I have a question. So I'm always, continuously surprised sometimes when I do see depictions of specifically Black Americans, but we can talk about other marginalized groups as a whole, on TV and film. What do you, when it's mostly white writers that are writing some of these parts, like, what are they basing it off of? That's what I always want to know. Like, who in your life do you know that is that way? Or like, have you really never met another Black person in your life? Like, from your you're shaking your head, but like from your vantage point, like what is the situation? Like, why are we still falling into the traps of these specific stereotypes and these views of certain marginalized groups? Like, I don't get it. It's 2021 and like it's still an issue.
Yeah, I just read a script written by a white person for Black people, and it was so shocking to read because I had the same question. Like, wait, is this what you think Black? Like, is this how you think we talk? Like, how we exist? And I do think it's based off of TV. Like, it's all like it's the same thing. It's based on like precedent. So they're like, well, what are the Black people we've seen on TV? And then they just recreate that. But because the Black people you've seen on TV are not good characters, they're just recreating a version of a shitty recreation of a version of a Black person. So by the time you see it on TV, it's just not a real thing. It's been shitted through like this lens of like different layers of like whiteness that it just takes away all of the authenticity. And that's why TV is bad. Like I'm in a room right now, and all of my references are like children's TV, and they're like, why do you watch so much children's TV? And I was like, have you seen TV? Have you seen, like, do you see how people are portrayed on TV? Like, it's very hard to watch certain shows because I'm like, I'm not interested in seeing this version of life because this is not what I watch TV for. I just don't want to see that. And I do think that is a problem. And because so long TV was such a, what's the word, homogenous thing, it was just like always written through the white lens, and so it makes sense why TV is the way that it is. And it's hard for them to let go of that. I'm just like, yes, these are not your stories to tell. Like there are people who can tell these stories better. Just because you've been allowed to tell them doesn't mean you're meant to.
Right,
Like
right,
you set the standard, but the bar is very low. Like it's
right,
not good.
right, right,
Like
right.
it could be better if you just allowed people to make it better, which isn't you, and they don't want to hear that.
Yeah. Do you think that there's a priority to kind of protect whiteness, like in terms of their types of characters? Because I feel like when it comes to white characters on television and film, we just see a wide variety. Like white people are almost allowed to be dynamic and nobody else is.
I think it's just come down to money
Mm.
and majority because white people are the
Oh, the majority, quote
majority
unquote. Yeah.
culture. They are just giving the space to. So I don't think like a lot of. I think whiteness is seen as like more dynamic because there's so many different versions of it because those are the only people who get to tell
Yeah.
stories.
Yeah.
I recently was trying to pitch a show, and the perception of like it was a show about like gangs, and the perception of like what gangs are. Most of the people that was hearing the pitch, the perspective would be where like what do they know gangs from? TV. And to present an idea of a gang that's not that, I felt was very hard for them to take in because they were like, this goes against every
Everything.
idea of
Yeah.
what a gang is in my head,
Absolutely.
and I'm like, because you've never actually met a gang. Like I have like family who are in gangs. Like my best friend in high school was in a gang. Like these are real people with depth, but because of the I just think like whiteness, because it's such a large swath, whiteness stays within whiteness. So if you don't go outside of it, you just don't know what it
Mhm.
is. So you're just creating an idea of who these people are. Like if I never went to Alaska and I was just like, I'm gonna write a movie about Alaska. That's what it feels like. It'd be
Yeah.
like, girl, you don't know. Like you don't. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's shocking.
I think also like when you speak about fear, there's also this fear of being wrong. So you don't even try to do the research. You're just going to, like you said, they're just going to go off of what they've been told or what they've seen for years. There's no attempt to actually try to write this completely wrong narrative that you've been following for however long.
Yeah, and they don't. There's no one forcing them to.
Yeah.
Like, there's no one like you should make this better. Like, if they're going to buy the bare minimum, why would you do more? And they don't because this is the system that they've created, which is you get a bunch of money to create these stories, but no one's gonna tell you how good to make the stories. They're gonna make you do the thing that sells. And if the thing that sells is shitty black characters, why would you make them better?
So, in terms of content that's out now, do you think anybody is getting it right?
Yes, I really do think I May Destroy You was such a great example of taking things that we know and making it fresh. Like I just never watched a show like that. Like it felt new. Like the point of view felt specific. And that's what I find interesting is seeing like, oh, what is your point of view? Like what how is this world different through your eyes? Like even if and I said this before like if white people like all white shows if there's a reason why the show's all white, I'm like, that makes sense. Like, if this is a specific point of view from this person, that's fine. But like, what I don't like is like using people as props to like check off a box.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, no, no. Like, if that's not like that's doing a disservice because if all the work that you've done is through this white lens and suddenly you're like okay well people are saying I should diversify and then you diversify in the worst way and then the people that have seen all your white shit and maybe don't watch other stuff is going to then create what their idea of that person through your art and now you're just created another stereotype you're just like
Right.
perpetuating
Right.
bad stuff. And I don't think people put a lot of thought into like the implications of TV. And I think very deeply about like why? Why are you doing that? Like what like how is this going to affect people, the world? Because as a young person, TV was such a major part of like my creation as a person.
Absolutely.
And I don't think people, especially the people in power,
The
understand how
responsibility behind it.
powerful. Yes, because like there are people without act like where TV is their access to the world, because like that's just what it is. And I don't, and because people with power and privilege do not think, because it's from the top down, they're not thinking about how that information is processed from the bottom up. And as somebody who grew up, I feel personally like from the bottom up, I'm like, oh, that's the place that I make art from, is being like, who is this going to hit at the bottom? Like, who is using this as the only source of access of information because of where they grew up, about of the privileges that they have. And so I just don't think enough people are asking why, because they never had to,
Yeah.
because especially within whiteness, there were so many ways to find yourself on TV. But if you're not white, there's that pool is so much smaller. So I feel like the amount of attention should be sharper and more, because there's less to process. And just like that mindset is one that is absent in
Right.
Hollywood, I think.
So what do you think the next step should be to kind of start to shift this?
Stop giving jobs to people that are already rich. Like, I do think like class is like a huge thing, and there's so much like nepotism, like just having points of views that are outside of that narrative, that are just like thinking about like what perspectives are.
Yeah.
And purposely trying to fill in the blanks. It's been like, this is not a perspective seen on TV. Put that on. So like literally just like giving space to different people, so that the people watching have a bigger pool of representation to choose from. And then just not letting the people that are in power right now dictate how that happens. Because again, they're at the top. Like they don't have, it's the same thing with like politics, and they've been like, these people don't need $15, and being like, where the fuck have you been? Like, are you dumb? Like, you don't know how that you never lived that.
Right.
So how could you even have a frame of reference?
Right.
So being very open with the amount of realistic knowledge that people at the top have, which is very little, and that's why nothing is changing, because they literally do not know what it needs to be changed
the reality
because
is
they have
different.
not lived it.
The reality
Yes,
is
it's just like not the
different.
same.
Yeah. I mean, even we could go into politics, but that we'd be on here forever. But like just bringing up like the minimum wage, I've always thought, obviously $7.25, like that's not even like a Starbucks and a pastry, right? But like when somebody put a $5 bill, two ones and a quarter next to each other in a picture, that right there, I was like, oh my God. It like, I already knew it wasn't anything. And then when you actually see the dollars, and you think 15 is too much. Yeah. That's wild to me.
It's insane.
They're just all out of touch. And I think we all know they're all older white men who are still operating off of, I don't know, systems that were created, I mean, probably since the beginning of time. But yeah, I think it's a testament to who is in charge, seeing how slow and the progress is and why it's taking for such a long time to change. So, I don't want to say they need to just go and die off, but I don't think it'll change until
literally that though. Like, and like they don't need to like, I'm just like, just give it up. Just like give
Move
it
on.
to someone else.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, just like, and like, you can still be there. Like, if you want to be there, sure. But like, move.
Right.
Like, let somebody else do it if you don't know how to do it. Like, be okay with admitting this is not my reality.
Right.
I'm going to bring somebody in here who is.
Right.
Like, I feel the same way with like, I'm not a woman, but I can empathize with a woman. But if there's a situation, like I remember being like, there's this thing called OWAs, where it's just like open writing assignments. So they just like, oh, this is an idea, can you give a take? So there was this film about rude, let me put this on do not disturb. There was a film about this black woman dancer, and as a dancer I was like, oh, I do have a point of view. But in that meeting I was like, yeah, I think y'all should get this to a black woman. Like, I'm going to give you my take, but also don't hire me, hire a black woman. And they were like, what? I'm like, look, I think this is like, for this idea to be what I think it could be, I think the perspective of an actual black woman is most beneficial for this, for the art to be like as good as it can
for
be.
it to be successful. Yeah.
And I'm like, it's, people should be okay with like knowing that like they are good, but maybe not the best for that project. or like the best for the end goal. And I'm like, yes, there is a version of this that I can do, but the version that I think would be best for the world artistically
Right,
would
right.
be from this perspective. And I don't think people think about art in that
They
way.
don't
They think
ever.
about money. They just like, oh, like this is, I want me to, like this, I need money, I need opportunities. So like, I'm going to do what I can to get what I want. Whereas I'm like, first of all, I don't want to be dragged. And also, like, I don't want to do a bunch of work just to find out later this could have been better
Right.
if this was given to this person, because then when it comes out, that's going to be on everybody's mind. Like, why, like, is this your story to tell? And I just don't want people to look at my films the way that I look at other people's films, and I just don't want to be a hypocrite. And I'm just like, look, what's, just like, think about it, just like, and I just kept asking like, why, and the why was like, this is not my story to tell. Like,
Right.
this is, there's just levels of this point of view that I do not have. Whereas like, if somebody who wasn't a queer black man wrote a movie about like queer black men, I would be like, how would you know? Like,
Right.
there is a very specific, like, and as like a gay black man, the intersection of like blackness and gayness is such a specific experience, and it would be insane of me to think like, oh well, my life is dynamic and complex, but like there's not, and I can write that. I'm like, no, that's crazy. Like, if I lived my life, I'm sure that person's life is just as complex based on the intersection of their identity. So probably find somebody closest to them who have probably had a lived experience and can speak on that in a way that I can't. And that's how good movies come out. That's why I May
Yeah.
Destroy You was so good,
Yeah.
because it was from a lived
Yeah.
experience that you can literally like write dialogue to. Like, there's just so much. And I just don't think people, like, it's crazy that like white men have thought that they could write every story since the beginning of it. Entertainment. That is crazy to me.
I think you're very rare because there are very few people that would step aside and say, you know what, I'm not right to write this. I'm not right to produce this. I'm not right to act this. Acting is probably, I think, one of the bigger issues in terms of taking on things that you have no business doing. Because you see, so I mean, I can talk about our favorite problematic person, Scarlett Johansson, that just has the nerve to be like, well, I'm an actress. It's like, girl, that's not what we're saying. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you can be an actress, but you have no business playing an Asian person. Like this, you just don't. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I love that about you, and I wish more people realize that and like stepped aside and is like, no, give this opportunity to this person.
there's just like such a bigger picture, and I think that's just like the way that I think is like very like macro versus micro.
Right.
Like, yes, I'm very self-centered, and like, and not in like the like bad way. I just like think about myself, and like I am the center of my universe,
Right.
because like that's who I am. But there is also a bigger picture. Like, when I die, the world would keep going on, and so my impact on the world is not just like finite. Like, I can do things that could like have bigger impacts. Like, if I became a terrorist, that is like a big impact. Like, and I do think people think that like only big negative things can like affect the world, but I think the same on like smaller positive things.
Yeah.
Like, you can also affect the world by doing things, and I don't want to just like live my life just for me constantly. I'm like, no, like there are things that we can think about outside of ourselves. And also, I don't even like, I yeah, I just find it strange. Maybe I've done too many drugs, and so my brain is just like too open. That's what my therapist and I have concluded, is that she was like, "Oh, you are just like on like a level that people do, like, you just think very deeply about everything."
Yeah.
And I was like, "But why aren't other people? Is that not like, do we not wake up every day like, why are we here? What are we doing?" I just
What's it
always have
all
those
even
thoughts.
for?
Truly, I'm like, what are we doing?
What's
I'm
your
just always
zodiac
asking like,
sign?
what is this? Scorpio.
Really? Huh. I don't know what I would have thought, but I don't think that would have been my first guess.
I think it's a Scorpio, and then my rising is Gemini, and then my moon is Libra, I believe.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's just crazy. I just, and I do think it stems from just like me growing up in the spaces that I grew up and having to very quickly at a young age to be like, what is this? Because like,
Yeah.
all of my thoughts is contrary to what I'm being told, and there has to be something more to this, because I can't just accept what's being told to me,
Right.
because then that would put me in a position of oppression, and I don't want that.
Right.
And so there was just always like this constant like, but what is this? How do I beat this? Because like I hate being mistreated and unhappy. So I'm just like, how do we stop this?
Well, I think you are doing a fabulous job making sure that that's what your life is going to be. So I want you to let everybody know where they can follow you. And I appreciate you sitting down with me for a little bit. I'm glad we finally were able to do this. But where can everybody follow you to keep up with the work that you're doing?
Yes, you can follow me on the Twitters at Dewayne Perkins.
He's like, I think that's my handle.
D-E-W, literally. That's D-E-W-A-Y-N-E, because there's more than one comedian named Dewayne Perkins. And then on Instagram, it's Dewayne K. Perkins, because Dewayne Perkins is taken by this old white man who I think have passed away, because I messaged him being like, let me get your name, and he has not responded.
Wait, you see an old white man?
Yeah.
Named Dewayne?
And I was like, Perkins.
You could probably get his Instagram handle.
How do people do that?
You have to contact Instagram and be like, hey, this has been inactive since da 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 da. Is there any way I can reclaim it? You can do that. I know people that have done that.
Let me go make my reps do some shit.
Seriously, have them do it. I'm not kidding. I know people that have done that have the same names and like they've had inactive or like a podcast name or whatever that's been inactive for like 4 years. Yeah, you just have to contact Instagram to reclaim it. And if they see there's been no activity, I think there's a certain amount of time that they're like, okay, yeah, they're not going to ever use this again. They can reclaim it for you.
Oh, wow. Nice. Thank you. Look,
of course.
This has been great. I've learned so much.
You're like, and that's the most valuable thing.
I'm like, nice. Let me go steal this. Let me go colonize this name.
Well, I love you, and I'm so glad that we were able to chat. And make sure you follow him on Twitter because he be wilding out every day. He got something to say, and I'm here for all of it.
Thank you. I love you too. This was a great conversation.
And make sure you subscribe to We Need to Talk on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And we'll talk to you again next week. Bye.